Hello everyone, I'm Sue McKenna and I'm going to be chatting to you for the next few minutes about how one goes about selecting a journal for the academic article that you've spent the last few months working on. There's a number of issues to take into consideration and there isn't one perfect solution, so you need to weigh these issues up and reach your own decision. The first thing I think you should consider is the style that you've used. Have you used a very chatty and formal style? Have you used a more objective, formal style? Whatever approach you've used, try and find the journal that fits that tone the best. Have a look at the journals that you've referenced, the journals that you've been drawing on for your article, and see which uses the kind of style that you're hoping to use in your article. Then, of course, there's the issue of readership. Who are you talking to? Who do you want to read this article? And what journals do those people read? What conversation are you joining? When we write an academic journal article, we're really just adding one tiny piece to a larger puzzle. We're contributing to a conversation that's been going on for some time. And so it's worth looking at where that conversation is happening. Which journals are you referencing the most? That's probably the best place for you to be publishing. Access is increasingly an issue as we become more critical of the way in which academic publishing serves certain parts of the planet better than others. Have a look at how accessible the journal is. Is it a particularly expensive journal that's only available through certain databases and therefore precludes readership by certain individuals, certain institutions, even certain countries? Maybe you want to go for an open access journal. Accreditation is a key issue for those of you working in South African universities, so I'll chat a bit more about that in a moment. And then, of course, there's the issue that different journals have got different citation counts and therefore have different sort of rankings in the international standing. And if that is something that is important to you, you might like to take that into consideration. So accreditation works very briefly as follows. In South Africa, public universities rely very heavily on state funding, and that state funding is made up of a block grant, which comes every year, and various ring-fenced grants for particular projects. The block grant is made up of three aspects: teaching input, which is the enrollment figures for all students from first year all the way through to postgraduate; teaching output, which is the graduation each year of undergraduate students; and then research output, which is made up of the graduation of postgraduate students and the research produced by academics within the institution. Now, that research can take many forms. It can take the form of artifacts, books, chapters in books, and indeed the accredited journal article that we're speaking about today. So how do journal articles become accredited? Well, first of all, you need to know that there's one full-time equivalent paid to the institution for each article which is deemed to be accredited. The value of that FTE, full-time equivalent, varies from year to year because it's one pot of money that gets divided up by however many articles are found to meet the criteria each year. And then that FTE gets divided up depending on where the authors were from. So if all the authors were from one institution, then the full FTE goes to that institution. If the authors were from two different institutions, then it would be 50-50 and so on. In some institutions, a portion of that money that the university accrues is then paid directly as an incentive into the research code of the individual researcher. And this is meant to drive research output. In other universities, such as my own university, Rhodes University, and University of Cape Town, that money is kept as a general pool for all researchers to access, and there isn't a direct incentive for research, on the understanding that doing research is as much of your job as an academic as doing teaching. So this is a somewhat contentious issue. How does the DHET decide which journals should count as accredited? Well, they use a range of lists, and they've handed this process over to ASAF, the Academy of Science of South Africa. And ASAF are using the 6 lists that you can see on the slide now. The first one is the DHET list of South African journals that are deemed to meet certain quality indicators. It's often known as the SAPSI list. And then there's the IBSS list, the Norwegian list, the Cielo list, the Scopus list, and the Web of Science list. This series of lists has actually recently been extended. So you can go into any of those lists and see thousands upon thousands of journals which have been deemed to be worthy of accreditation. How do these different organizations decide which journals to include? Well, they all have their own criteria, but by and large, these include things like they have a double-blind process, and this is very carefully followed. What this really means is that when you submit your journal article, you have to submit two versions. You submit one with your details on and another anonymized version which doesn't indicate who you are. So this is then a blind version that gets sent to reviewers. So when the reviewers read your article, they don't know who wrote it. Those reviewers then submit their perspectives on whether your article should be published or not to the editor of that journal, and the editor will then send that feedback to you. But when you receive it, you will not see the names of the reviewers. And this is what it means to be double blind. You, as the author, do not know who the reviewers are. The reviewers do not know who the author is. Another indicator to ensure that a journal gets onto an accredited list is the quality and the consistency of publishing. Do they publish regularly? Do they publish on time? Do they have proofreading of a high standard? Does the journal have an editorial board that includes credible, reputable academics within that specific discipline? And are those editorial people from across different countries? A rather sad one is the idea of a rejection rate. If a journal is high quality, it is assumed that it gets far more submissions than it is ever able to publish, and so it has a high rejection rate. A new rule that ASAF have implemented is this idea that at least 75% of the publications within a journal have to come externally from the institution that hosts that journal. I think this is a very good rule to ensure that we don't have nepotism. So if UNISA, for example, hosted a theology journal, that theology journal would need to show that at least 75% of the articles it publishes come from academics who are not associated with UNISA. But there may be times when you want to publish in a journal that is not on one of those accredited lists. And I think this is very important to consider. It may be that there's a particular open access journal that's not an accredited list, but you feel that it speaks to the readership that would be interested in your research. Or perhaps it's a new journal and it hasn't got onto an accredited journal list yet because a journal has to have established a number of years of good quality publication before it can apply for accreditation. So there are often reasons why you might choose to publish in a journal that is not on one of those lists. You just need to bear in mind the implications are that your institution will not then get funding for it. However, there are some journals that you really should never publish in. These are known as predatory journals. Predatory journals typically can be identified because they approach you. They send you emails, often full of spelling and grammar errors, and try to solicit scripts from you. They will ask you who you want to have as your reviewers, so it's not double-blind. They make rash promises that you're going to have a quick and easy publication in a very short space of time. So there's a man called Beale who keeps a list of what are known as predatory publications, and you can see here from his website, there are just a few of them down below, and you can read more from that website about what criteria he uses for determining which are predatory publications. Let me just go on a little bit more and show you some more of these predatory publications on the Beale's list, and a few more, and so we go on, and the list goes on, and the list goes on, and all that very long list that I showed you are just the predatory journals beginning with the letter A. So you can see that there's an unscrupulous industry out there taking advantage of novice academics who don't necessarily know the means by which we establish quality in academic publication. And the truth is that you don't want these publications on your CV. They might be easy to get, but they do not look good on your CV. So instead, we want to ask ourselves, where is the conversation happening? You're contributing to a field. You're taking part in a conversation that's already happening around the phenomenon. You might be agreeing with people in that conversation. You might be challenging some of the perspectives in that conversation. But you want to clearly show how your work ties in with what is happening already. And in fact, all your references are drawing on that conversation to substantiate the claims that you're making. So have a look and see where most of your references are coming from. Where are you doing most of your reading? Which references are the most important and significant for the argument you're making in this particular journal article? That's probably where you should publish. You need to look carefully once you've chosen the journal as the potential publication that you would like to send your article to. Look carefully at the web page for that journal. There'll be a section on the aims and objectives for that journal, and just see whether the argument you're building in your journal article aligns well with what that journal is setting out to do. Also look very carefully at the page usually called Guidelines for Authors, which stipulates the technical and stylistic requirements. There's nothing more irritating for an editor than getting a draft article which is 8,000 words when the guidelines clearly stipulate that 7,000 words is the maximum. And if you do that, chances are the editor will not send your article to review and it'll be thrown out at that very first hurdle. My suggestion is that you select your journal quite early on in the process of drafting your article, so that you can take that into consideration and so that you can go and seek additional articles on that conversation from that journal. Editors like to see that you have referenced their own journal and you've clearly shown how your article contributes to the conversation that they have been publishing. I think it's also a good idea to choose a plan B, a second journal, so that if by chance you get rejected by that first journal, you can use the feedback you get from the reviewers from that first journal to improve the quality of your article and then send it on to your plan B journal. The only rule is, and it's a very strict rule, is you can never send your journal article to two journals at the same time. You need to wait to see what's happened at the first journal before you move on to another one. Good luck with your publications, and I look forward to reading some of your words in print.